The storm rolled in from the mountains like a beast, swallowing the last light of day behind black clouds. Lightning tore open the sky, painting the desert in flashes of white and violet. Jack McGraw hunched low in the saddle, hat pulled down, the brim dripping with rain. The air was thick with the smell of dust, wet sage, and something heavy he couldn't name, something that made his chest ache the way it always did when night came too early. His horse snorted, uneasy, hooves slipping on the slick path as they descended into a narrow ravine. He'd been riding since dawn, driving cattle across miles of dry land, trying to tire himself enough to forget the emptiness that had become his life. 2 years ago, his wife had died from fever, and since then, the world had gone quiet. They called him Iron Jack in town, partly because of the way he never spoke more than necessary, partly because he seemed made of stone. But inside, the man was hollow. The ranch he'd built with his wife still stood, the fences mended and the cattle fat, but every board, every gate, every shadow of that house whispered her name. He'd long stopped praying. God, he thought, had turned his back long ago. As the rain came harder, he thought he saw a movement ahead, something small, stumbling through the mud. He slowed his horse, peering through the sheets of water. It wasn't an animal, it was a person, a woman, barefoot, her dark hair plastered to her shoulders, her body swaying as if every step cost her more than she had left to give. She looked broken and wild, like something torn out of the earth itself. Jack dismounted, boots sinking in the mud. Hey, he shouted over the thunder. You'll freeze out here. The woman turned sharply, eyes wide. She took a step back, trembling, one hand clutching a leather pouch around her neck. Her face was marked with dirt, her lips cracked, her skin copper-toned beneath the grime. He could see she was young, maybe 20, maybe less, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice that. Don't come closer, she cried. Her voice was hoarse, but there was steel in it. No white man helps Apache. Jack stopped where he was, the wind whipping at his coat. He'd heard the same bitterness before. Out here, the hatred between settlers and the native tribes was older than the fences, older than the ranches. But all he saw in front of him was a human being about to collapse. I don't care who you are, he said, his voice steady. You'll die if you stay out here. She looked at him for a long moment, suspicion flickering in her eyes. The thunder cracked again, closer this time, and the sound seemed to shake her. She took a faltering step forward. He took off his coat, holding it out. Here, he said. She hesitated before reaching out. When her fingers brushed his hand, they were ice cold. She flinched from the touch, but clutched the coat tightly around her small frame. Without another word, he led her to his horse and helped her climb up. The storm swallowed their tracks as they rode toward the ranch. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen completely. The place stood lonely against the hills, a rough-built home of logs and stone. Jack tied up his horse and ushered her inside. The girl stepped in hesitantly, her bare feet leaving muddy prints on the wooden floor. He lit the oil lamp, then the fire, the light chasing away the chill and shadows. She crouched near the flames, shivering. Her hair dripped water onto the floor, and when she pulled the coat tighter, he noticed her arm, scratched and bruised, with dried blood near her shoulder. He knelt beside her, not too close. You're hurt, he said. She turned her face away. It's nothing, it ain't nothing, he muttered, grabbing a tin basin and filling it with warm water. When he came back, she was still clutching that little pouch around her neck as if it were her heartbeat. What happened? He asked quietly, wetting a cloth. Her lips trembled before the words came out. White men, she said, her voice breaking. Miners. They came to our camp. They wanted to take our land. My brother tried to fight. They killed him. Her shoulders shook. I ran. Jack swallowed hard. He'd heard of such things before. Settlers pushing tribes off their land, violence brewing in the name of progress. It always left someone dead. You got a name? He asked. Taya, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, Taya, he said, wringing the cloth. I'm Jack. You can stay here till the storm lets up. That's all right. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. He reached for her arm gently, cleaning the wound. When she flinched, he murmured, easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you. She tried to stay still, but the sting of the water made her gasp. Don't stop, she whispered weakly. He froze. For a split second, he thought she meant something else entirely, something that made the air between them feel charged, confusing, wrong. He felt shame burn hot across his face. I'm sorry, he said, pulling his hand back quickly. Didn't mean nothing by it. Before he could say another word, she slumped forward. He caught her before she hit the floor, lifting her slight body into his arms. She'd fainted. Her skin burned with fever. Jack laid her gently on the cot in the corner, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. He sat beside her for hours as the fire died down, listening to the rain ease into a soft, steady rhythm. In the dim glow, her face looked younger, almost peaceful. He wondered what kind of life she'd had before all this, before the storm, before fear drove her into his world. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for himself but for her. When dawn broke, the desert looked clean again. The sky was clear, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. Jack brewed coffee, frying bacon over the fire. The smell filled the cabin. Taya stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked around, disoriented, before realizing she was safe. "You hungry?" Jack asked softly. She nodded, sitting up carefully. He handed her a tin plate. She ate slowly, every movement cautious, as if unsure she was allowed. "Where you headed?" he asked after a while. "North," she said, "to the river. My mother's people there." He studied her. "It's a long way, and those miners are still out there. You can stay here till you're strong enough to travel." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" Jack stared into the fire. "Maybe 'cause I'd hope someone would have done the same for my wife if she was out there alone." The silence between them softened after that. Later that day, two men rode up the trail toward the ranch. Jack stepped outside, hand near his rifle. The miners looked mean, the kind who grinned while lying. "We're looking for an Apache girl," one said. "She stole something valuable." Jack's voice was cool. "Ain't seen no one." They looked past him toward the cabin, suspicion narrowing their eyes. "If you're hitting her, you'll regret it." Jack didn't blink. "I said I ain't seen no one." After a long pause, they spat on the ground and rode off. Jack waited until they disappeared before going back inside. Taya stood near the window, shaking. "They want the carving," she said softly, clutching her pouch. She opened it, revealing a small wooden eagle, worn smooth by years of touch. "My brother made it. His spirit lives here." Jack looked at her, something like respect stirring in his chest. "Then we'll keep it safe." The wind outside died down, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of rain dripping from the roof. For the first time since the storm began, Jack felt warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. Something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't yet name, but it felt like the start of a promise. The days stretched into weeks, and Taya slowly began to heal. The bruises faded, her cuts closed, and her eyes, once full of fear, grew calm. She started to move around the ranch with quiet purpose, feeding the horses before dawn, gathering water from the well, mending the torn saddles she found in the barn. Jack had never asked her to help, but she did anyway, perhaps out of gratitude, or perhaps because keeping her hands busy was the only way to keep her pain from swallowing her whole. Jack watched her from a distance most days, pretending to focus on chores. There was something about her stillness that made him uneasy, not fear, not discomfort, but the kind of awareness that only came when one's heart started waking up after being asleep too long. He'd spent years trying to keep the world out, but now, here was this woman from another world entirely, humming soft, haunting melodies that carried through the desert air like wind through canyon walls. He didn't understand the words, but they stirred something deep inside him. When he rode into town for supplies, whispers started to follow him like dust. The store clerk, a thin man with mean eyes, smirked as Jack paid for flour and coffee. "Heard you got company up there," the man said. "Brown-skinned kind. Apache, ain't she?" Jack's shoulders stiffened. "Don't see how that's your concern." The man's smile faltered, but he pressed on. "Careful, McGraw, folks around here don't take kindly to your sort mixing with theirs. Sheriff Cole's been asking questions." Jack said nothing, just loaded the supplies onto his horse. But by the time he reached home, the anger in him had hardened into something heavy. He'd lived by one rule his whole life: leave others be, and demand the same in return. Now, that rule was breaking under the weight of gossip and hatred that wasn't even his. When he walked into the cabin, Taya was kneeling by the fire, carving something small from a piece of wood. The moment she saw his face, she knew. "They came," she said quietly. He nodded, setting down the sack of flour. "They're talking. Sheriff's asking questions. There's a bounty out now, on runaways, on your people." Her hands trembled for a moment, but she didn't stop carving. "They won't stop," she said softly. "They never do." Jack sat down across from her, tired eyes meeting hers. You could go north like you said. I can give you a horse, supplies, enough to get you to the river. Taya shook her head. If I go, they will come here anyway. They'll burn your house. They think I took their gold. They will not stop because of one girl. He frowned. Then what are you gonna do? Let 'em find you. She looked up, her gaze steady. I'm not hiding forever. That night, after she went to sleep, Jack sat on the porch with a cigarette, watching the moon rise. He thought of his wife, of how she used to sit beside him and talk about planting apple trees behind the barn, of how her laughter had once filled these walls. It had been years since anyone's voice had done that. The ache in his chest that he'd buried so deep began to stir again, and for the first time, he didn't push it away. The next morning, he found Taya outside, dressed in the simple clothes he'd given her, her long hair braided down her back. She looked stronger now, but her eyes still carried that quiet sorrow. She was feeding his horse when she said, "You have good land here." "Quiet land, quiet," he said, nodding. "That's all I ever wanted. But quiet can be lonely," she said. He didn't answer, because she was right. He'd built his life out of silence, and only now was he beginning to understand how heavy silence could become. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather again, gray and swollen with rain. Jack was mending the fence when he saw movement near the ridge, 2 riders approaching. Even from a distance, he recognized them, the same miners who had come before. His stomach turned cold. He dropped the hammer and walked toward the porch, rifle in hand. The riders stopped at the gate. One of them spat on the ground. "Heard you're still harboring that Apache girl," the man sneered. "Sheriff says there's a reward for her kind. You hand her over, and we won't burn your damn place to the ground." Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. "Ain't no Apache girl here," he said evenly. The man smirked. "You're a bad liar, McGraw. We seen her tracks near the creek." He swung down from his horse. "Be a shame if that nice cabin of yours went up in smoke." The sound of a cocked rifle broke the tension. Taya stood in the doorway, the old Winchester Jack kept by the bed resting in her arms. "Leave," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and cold. The miners turned, startled. One laughed. "Ain't she somethin', feisty, too?" Before Jack could move, the man reached for his pistol. But the crack of gunfire came first. The bullet hit the dirt near his boot, close enough to send both men stumbling back. "I don't miss twice," Taya said. They left cursing, spitting threats into the wind, but they didn't come back. When their silhouettes vanished over the ridge, Jack turned to her. "You could have gotten yourself killed." She lowered the rifle slowly. "So could you." The silence that followed was sharp, alive. The air between them felt like the desert before rain, thick, waiting. Jack looked at her, really looked at her. The strength in her, the defiance, the pain that had forged her. He realized he wasn't protecting her anymore. She'd been protecting herself all along. That night, she sat by the fire, holding the little eagle carving. "When my brother died," she said, "I thought the sky went dark forever. But maybe there is light still. Just not the kind we expect." Jack sat beside her. "You talk like someone twice your age." She smiled faintly. "Grief makes us old." He stared at the flames. "You could stay, you know. I can't promise much, just food, a roof, peace." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "And you, what would you have?" He hesitated. "Maybe the same thing." In the days that followed, life began to find its rhythm again. Taya sang as she worked, low and soft, her voice blending with the wind through the mesquite trees. Jack rebuilt the fences, repaired the roof, and for the first time in years, laughter, quiet, rare, but real, filled the cabin. But peace in that country never lasted long. Word of what happened reached town, and though the miners never returned, Jack knew others might. Still, he didn't waver. He'd made his choice. When another storm rolled in one evening, thunder rolling across the desert, Taya stood at the doorway watching it. The lightning reflected in her eyes, and she whispered, "It's the same storm from that night. But I'm not afraid anymore." Jack came up beside her, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You shouldn't be. Storms don't last." She turned to him, her face illuminated by the firelight. "You were the storm that night. You just didn't know you were saving me." He looked down at her, his voice low. "And you were the calm after." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, washing the land clean again. The wind howled through the canyons, but inside the cabin, there was warmth, laughter, and something new, something alive. Long after the storm passed, folks in town still whispered about Iron Jack McGraw and the Apache girl who lived with him. Some called it madness, some called it scandal. But those who ever rode past his ranch at dusk, when the light turned gold and the air was still, swore they saw two riders in the distance, a tall rancher and a woman with black hair flowing behind her, side by side, moving together through the vast open land. And if you listened close enough to the thunder fading across the hills, it almost sounded like her voice again, soft and unafraid, whispering the same words that had once been misunderstood. Don't stop. Only this time, Jack knew exactly what she meant. She was telling him to keep going, to keep living, to never stop.